warm welcome. Thanks so much for joining me. So today I'd like to discuss how to change your mood. So despite the title of this video and podcast, I actually want to talk about 3 ways to work with our moods, how to work with them in the short term, how to work with them in the midterm, and then how to work with them in the long term. Of course, a lot of this is going to come from my own experience of working with my moods, as well as some Buddhist wisdom sprinkled in, especially when we're talking about working with our moods and emotions in the mid to long term. So to start with the short term, this might seem obvious to some of you, though, this was not always obvious to me. So I thought to share it, which is move your body, right? So if we're having a tough day, if we're struggling, our energy's a bit down, or we're struggling with a certain kind of cloud or mood over us, move the body, especially more intense exercise. So for me personally, I don't know for you, I love walking, but walking doesn't often cut it when it comes to shifting my mood through exercise. I need to do something more vigorous, more intense. It usually doesn't have to be for a long period of time. It could be, just for 10 or 15 minutes. As long as it's vigorous, I'm, panting, I guess you could say, and sweating. I notice a big mood shift. And of course, this is just biological, physical. We're bringing more oxygen into the blood. The blood is able to move more through the body. And then, of course, our moods are going to shift because our emotions, our moods are related to the energy movement in our body from a traditional medicine perspective, like Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, and Ayurvedic medicine. And so, of course, when we shift the makeup of how the blood is moving, oxygen in our blood, that's also going to have a positive effect on our energy. And also in those medical traditions, we're moving the wind energy or prana around. And this can also help to shift the mood as our mind or our emotions ride around on the wind. So when we move this wind energy, when we move this energy of movement, which we call prana or in Tibetan lung, the moods can shift. This is why pranayama practices or breath-based meditation practices work really well for shifting moods because they move the wind energy, the prana or lung around, and therefore affect our moods. So that would be my recommendation in the short term. It just works, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have short-term strategies, maybe getting outside, getting into nature, being with your kids, I'm not sure. So throw those in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. I'd really appreciate that. If you have some other short-term strategies, really, there's probably many. In the midterm, because I'm a meditation teacher and more specifically, I teach around Buddhist meditation, I'm going to start to provide some things that work for me in working with my emotions here. And so in the midterm, and I don't really have a set amount of time I'm implying by that. Midterm can mean a year and or more, depending on the person, could be a couple of years. And really, this would be related to a meditation practice of working directly with our emotions. And specifically, I would recommend encountering a meditation practice that includes some kind of compassion and somatic work. So what I mean by that, compassion would be this element of actually not turning away from a bad mood, not trying to necessarily solve or get rid of it. Compassion would be an approach that we want to learn how to be with our experience more. We want to understand it and befriend it as opposed to just, solve it and get rid of it. So compassion requires often a deeper dive into being willing to feel and or be with a bad mood or a difficult emotion. And from there, we can then introduce somatic or embodied-based meditations for learning to feel the feeling or learning to feel the felt aspect of a mood. So in the case of sadness, as an example, often for me, sadness kind of comes up as a heaviness in the heart, right? So sadness is kind of related to that broken heart energy. It can be connected to that. And when we say, oh, I have a broken heart, what do we mean? We mean we feel heavy here. We feel low. Sometimes we feel hollow or a gap. So when we bring our attention with compassion, with a willingness to befriend these types of feelings, over time, we can start to shift how we relate to them. Now, just a disclaimer here, this might not actually shift the mood in the short term, but what it will do is grow our strength and muscle of compassion and our ability to be with all of our life experience, which I actually think is even more valuable and important than shifting a mood. I make the case for that in a lot of my content. If for some of you who watch my YouTube channel or read my blogs or listen to my podcast, you'll see a lot of content really emphasizing and recommending the process of long-term self-compassion work. And so what this looks like is not necessarily compassion towards what we think of as self, but what makes up self, meaning the emotions we go through, the moods, different kinds of beliefs, thought processes, and not just ones that are uncomfortable, but ones that are actually comfortable too. So in the midterm, if we put some regular effort into meditation practices, like the handshake practice, which is something I recommend a lot, which is comes from my teacher, Sonny Rinpoche. I also have some content on it, and different somatic practices I've shared. If that's a little too advanced for you, there's ones that are actually you can start with just feeling places in the body that is more neutral, that isn't activated with strong moods or emotions, and we learn to be there. We learn to open to that. We learn to not reject what's arising, but also because we're cultivating meditative awareness, we also learn to host these different experiences, moods, and emotions with awareness, this quality of mind that can bear witness, that can become watchful of our experience and our human life. So if you want more on that, you can definitely go to my website and check out guided meditations there. Like I said, I also have a lot of content on that on my YouTube channel, podcast, and in blog posts. So as far as long-term, this is where I would say we're going a little bit more into lineage-based Buddhism, what I practice personally as much as I can, and also what I recommend for people who have been meditating for a while and they're kind of treading water a little bit or wondering, what else, or is there more? And yeah, there's a lot more. And that really comes from where mindfulness and meditation practice comes from, which is traditional Indic traditions, not just Buddhism, but the other kinds of Indic philosophies and traditions, as well as I know some other cultures as well, but I'm just sort of sticking to Indic traditions coming from India as one example. So as far as one example of traditions coming from India, we have Buddhism. Now, Buddhism is very interesting when it comes to working with moods or emotions because it doesn't take the strategy that the problem is the mood, right? So I think initially, if we're approaching it short term, the problem is the mood, and we're just trying to shift our body, move a little bit, trying to open up the energy. In the midterm, because we're moving into more Buddhist approaches, we also are starting to work with a way of looking at it where we don't have to reject it right away. Right. So we're not immediately rejecting the mood or emotion, and instead we're learning to feel and be with it. So that would be moving into the territory of what the Buddha taught. But more fully, in the long term, and long term can mean our whole life, that we are really year after year working with an approach to life that of understanding that life is a consequence of a type of misperception. This does go into the religious department, so if you aren't interested, you can just tune that part out. But of course, Buddhism doesn't believe this is our first rodeo, that, the mind is beginningless and endless. And, the idea of just going into another physical body or location, when you think about it, it's not so radical. Because what is our physicality? Our mind also comes through the physical body, meaning we feel not because we have a body, we feel because there's a mind. It just so happens the mind is encapsulated in a body right now. So anyways, so we can sort of go into some of these discussions to understand that there is a strong possibility that we don't die, so to speak. The body will, the mind will move on. And so what we're trying to do is understand the mechanism of what happens when the mind is not relating to reality properly. And that's what Buddhism really focuses on when you really go into it, because that's what that territory is the actual remedy. We start to understand and then apply meditation towards a remedy of the whole entire idea of what existence looks like in the form of different bodies moving through time, which in the Buddhist tradition, we would say is a form of suffering, right? Probably one of the deepest ones. And so obviously this is a big lift and this takes some time. We need to study some Buddhist philosophy. It's not something I recommend adopting as a belief right away. It's something we need to reflect on and think about. And then of course apply meditation to. So as I've said in previous content, meditation in the Buddhist sense is built on a view or intention of what we are trying to get used to. It's built on a sense that we're not just meditating only to feel better, that we're actually meditating to understand, life and why things happen, the causes, and we're trying to remove those causes of deeper suffering, including what goes on beyond this life. So I'll leave that there because I know that's trickier territory for some of you, but, give it some thought. Don't throw it out right away. There's a lot of depth here when we go on a deeper dive over time into what the implications of what I'm saying are. So from that place, the more long-term way of working with moods and emotions is actually understanding them as an expression of a confused mind. And what do we mean, an expression of what do I mean by an expression of a confused mind? So mind is something that can function on two different levels. It can function on the level of duality, where there's a subject-object experience of mind, meaning there's someone here perceiving a world and others that are out there. Or, on the other side, mind can experience itself as more unified and more in line with reality, which is experiencing life without that separation into self and other. Now, words don't quite do this justice, because what they're actually referring to in the Buddhist path is a direct experience we need to develop over time through meditation, contemplation, and learning the Dharma. But this is really the long-term strategy for working with moods and emotions, because we start to understand moods and emotions are based on a misperception of self and other. And another way to talk about this is using the Sanskrit term pratitya samutpada, which means interdependence. So we learn to connect with this idea of interdependence rather than independence. And the idea of interdependence is, again, this unified experience that we are not separate from everything else. And so this is long-term because it obviously takes a lot of time to develop not only an understanding of this, but an actual experience through meditation. We start to taste it, and then that taste grows and grows. But this is what the Buddha, described as more the ultimate solution. Because if we don't work at this level, we're always going to have to apply some kind of a remedy or strategy towards a bad mood or an emotion we dislike. And we're never going to understand or relate to the underlying cause. So the Buddha, in his compassion and intelligence, really went right to the root cause and, of course, remedied that for himself. And then that's what he taught. He taught the path of how to remedy what we call dukkha, or dissatisfaction, suffering, pain, and this fundamental confusion of mind. So like I said, this fundamental confusion of mind, it also is not an innate thing. It's like a dream that's laid on top of what reality actually is. And so because it's a dream and it's a type of confusion, it's removable. So this is the good news. So I think when we study these deeper areas of Buddhist philosophy and how they might affect how we work with our emotions and moods, it's not to believe something, actually. It's to open up a whole new way of looking at ourselves and the world and looking at the process of how we work with mind. It's also to understand that this dreamlike quality to how we're experiencing this confusion around self and other can be remedied, can be removed, like I already said. And I think that needs to be emphasized a lot, because that's the good news. That's the positive news. Even though what I'm talking about is something very, challenging to see, and like I said, challenging to directly experience. Nonetheless, it's great news, because we can see, do we want to stay on the wheel, sort of like, putting a Band-Aid on something, or do we want to go to the very root of what the sickness is or the confusion is and remedy it there? So, I just wanted to present these three levels of how I think about working with moods and emotions, how I personally do it. We can even think of them as sort of different investment strategies in ourselves, right? Like short-term investment, mid-term, and long-term. I recommend doing all three, because, the short-term one we might need, but it's not very reliable because it doesn't last that long, right? Because we're bound to experience a mood change, a difficult emotion again. The midterm is a little bit more reliable, because we're not trying to necessarily get rid of emotions or bad moods. We're trying to learn to work with them through compassion and embodiment. And in the long term, we're actually trying to see the underlying causes of why we experience a bad mood in the first place, right? And again, like I said, Buddhism would say there's this fundamental confusion happening, that when we believe there's a separate self, we experience afflictive emotions and challenging emotions and moods. So I hope this was helpful. Obviously, for the more long-term strategy I'm mentioning here, this requires some learning and in-depth, an in-depth approach to a path. And you don't have to do this on your own. There's systems that are built for it. So I recommend, you go check that out. There's many different Buddhist lineages, wonderful teachers out there who not only have a lot of knowledge and experience, but actually have realized some of these things. So I recommend going to seek those kinds of teachers and communities out. And of course, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to recommend things. Also, if you want to do some learning with me, you're welcome to check stuff out on my website at scotttusa.com. You can find courses as well as mentoring and different offerings, and a lot of just freely given content on my YouTube page, blog page, podcasts, etc., where you're listening to this right now. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope this was helpful. Give it some thought, short-term, mid-term, long-term. I would love to hear what you think of this. If you want more content like this, I'm happy to make it. Thanks so much. Take care.